Okay, hello CUSEC. My talk today is called Words Are Hard, Talking Good Via Computer. So I'm just going to dive right in. First off, who am I and why should you listen to me? Well, hello, I'm Peter Sobot, at psobot on Twitter. Go on there and angrily tweet at me during my talk, I'll love it. Here's my Twitter page and bio and all that stuff. That's basically my life story right there. So right now I'm an engineer at a company called PagerDuty. I'll touch on them in a second. I do music stuff, I do photography stuff, and software stuff. I'm based out of Toronto. Here's my NASCAR slide of all my sponsors in the past, places I've worked and things. I was a student at Waterloo. I came to CUSEC a couple years ago and, wow, all right, thank you. I came to CUSEC a couple years ago. It was amazing. I'm so glad to be back. This is an amazing conference and glad that I'm here. I worked at some companies like Inkling and Capcom in the working group. I had 15 minutes of internet fame from building something called the Web Machine. And then now I work at PagerDuty. So what's PagerDuty? We're the company that wakes you up when your servers go down in the middle of the night. So if you are working at, let's say, Slack or eBay or Groupon or Chef or like any of these companies, they need to make sure they're up 100% of the time. And that's what we do. We send out notifications and put people on call. So I might get paged during this talk, but hopefully not. Here's our NASCAR slide of all of our happy customers. There are lots more than that. And we hire lots of interns in both Toronto and San Francisco and treat them very well. That's it. Find me afterwards if you want to talk about that. Corporate chilling over. Okay, so words are hard, talking good via computers. This is a talk about communication. Why is my talk slide grammatically incorrect? Like my title and doing other good stuff too. Words are hard, it's true. The talk today is about how easy it is to be misunderstood when communicating online. Talking is hard, typing is hard, writing is hard. But why am I talking about communication? This is CUSEC. This is a software engineering conference. Communication doesn't really seem like it fits, does it? Well, software engineering is all about communication, or at least I'm going to claim that's true. If you look up what software engineering is on Wikipedia, it's supposedly the application of engineering to the development of software in a systematic method. That doesn't really mean that much. But if you look at subdisciplines, so different areas you can focus on within software engineering, actually writing code, programming, typing, all those things, that's a very small part of what's considered software engineering, right? I can zoom in and like, coding is one word in a sea of other stuff, like verification, unit testing, requirements and design and things like that. Communication is most of what you're going to end up doing as a software engineer. Here's an example from real life. This is a real pull request that I submitted at work a couple days ago. It was a 6-line code change to PagerDuty's iOS app. 6 lines of Swift, really small, easy to understand. But to justify the change, to explain it to my coworkers, I wrote 3 paragraphs of text, had 3 links, 1 image, and 1 quote. That seems like a lot, right? There's an order of magnitude more English text there than there is code. And the code is what matters, right? Well, not really. Having this change documented so others can understand it is the most important part. And this was like, if I break it down, a lot of that is the explanation of the bug, what the documentation says, the user impact of the bug, how the code fixes the bug. All of that is super important. So communication is honestly what I do day to day. Writing code is a very small part of what I do. And if I were to write more code than I wrote English text to other people, the code would be of terrible quality because I'd write the wrong code and I wouldn't have input from my smart coworkers who are much smarter than I am. So, most communication now happens online, probably. Footnote, asterisk. This is not a scientific thing. I did not find statistics on this. It just feels this way. When I ask around, and at my own work, it seems that everyone's using online tools to collaborate and build their software, or build whatever they're working on, to be honest. That's partially because there are great tools for this now. We have things like Slack and like GitHub. If you're not familiar, Slack is the awesome team chat tool that everybody seems to use, and GitHub is the code collaboration tool that everybody seems to use. You're going to end up using these at some point in your career if you work in software, or maybe HipChat and Bitbucket, or maybe Campfire and Basecamp. It doesn't really matter. There's going to be a team chat tool in your future and a code collaboration tool in your future. Okay, so if building software involves a lot of communication, and communication is increasingly happening online, what could go wrong, right? There's not that much room for anything to go wrong, right? Of course. Well, there is a big problem. We have all these tools, but we still need to consider people's emotions. People have emotions. I hope this is not news to anybody in the room, but like, humans have emotions, and they don't check them at the door when they go to work. Having emotions is normal and healthy, and you bring that to work, and that's fine. But people need to feel safe and accepted at work. And that becomes hard if you're using these tools to kind of decouple people from the thing that you're talking about. I'll get into that in a sec, but healthy work environments require respect. And people don't do their best work if they think their coworkers feel negatively about them. Why would people think that your coworkers feel negatively about you? Well, if you're communicating via text, a lot of the emotional sentiment of what you're saying gets lost. If I have a very happy statement that I want to talk about, I type that down into text, send that to someone else, and it becomes neutral. It becomes flat text on the page. Text removes the emotional sentiment of something you might be talking about. So I'm going to put up a big quote here. You don't need to read this. I'm going to read this out loud, but this is from one of my coworkers named Corey Chamblin, at Chamblin on Twitter there if you're interested. And he says, "It's important to recognize that written communications have a profoundly negative bias. We tend to interpret neutral communications as negative and positive communications as neutral, which is a source of a lot of consternation. To combat this, strive for overt positivity." So that's a bunch of text that's hard to understand. Let me diagram this a little bit. So what Corey's saying is that written text can be negative, neutral, or positive. You could write something that's explicitly negative, like "I hate you," and it's easy to understand that, right? If you get that message, you can tell it's negative. But what Corey's saying is that neutral text is also interpreted as negative, just because it's written down. Now, why is this? Well, if I'm talking to someone face to face, there's a lot of information they're getting from me by just being there, right? There's facial expression, there's tone of voice, there's body language, there's eye contact. All of these things are important. But written text does not have that. Written text removes all the default communication that happens at almost a subconscious level. This gets even worse. If neutral communication comes across as negative, positive communication comes across as neutral. So you could say something that's explicitly very positive, like "great job, good work," and it comes across as just like, "Okay, I guess you did a thing. That's cool." There have been some really cool studies on this too. Back in 2005, there was a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, which said something about how email transmits emotions. The researchers asked people to send emails to others and asked them how much they thought the other people or the recipients of the email would understand the emotional content of the message. And the senders said 78% of the time they would understand the emotional content of the message. But when they actually measured and they asked the recipients, it was only about 56% of the time that the emotional content came through. That's surprising. That means 1 out of every 2 emails, half the emails roughly, had emotional content that was being misjudged by the people reading. So text is notoriously lossy when it comes to emotional content. This is important because asking for feedback can make people feel vulnerable. You're taking something that you made and asking someone else to judge it. That makes you feel vulnerable because their judgment isn't just about the thing that you've made. If it's code, if it's design work, whatever it is, you feel like they're judging the work that you made, which is an intrinsic judgment about yourself. Code reviews do usually contain neutral feedback, which should be okay, but remember, neutral written text comes across as negative. So any code review that you get, or any feedback on design work that you've done, or whatever it is, will then be coming across as negative by default. So, how do we combat this? Let me give you an example. Here's some code. What language is it in? Doesn't really matter that much, but it's Ruby. Let's say it's Ruby for now. Foo equals 5, foo plus plus. That's my code change. I worked so hard on that, that's great. I'm gonna put that up on GitHub and ask someone else for a review on that. And here is the first piece of review comment I get back. This won't work, the syntax is incorrect. Mic drop, done, okay. That's not a great comment. I could have run this in the console, asked Ruby to run it, and Ruby would have told me the same thing. Just say syntax error, unexpected end of input, nothing else. This is the kind of comment that is factually correct. It's what a machine might have said, but coming from a human, it comes across extremely negatively. This can be read as, "You made something broken, this won't work." Oh, well, yeah, that's no fun. Also, just saying the syntax is incorrect offers me no indication of what I can do to fix the problem. It offers no proposed solution. So if I were to read this, if I was new to a company and someone said this to me, I'd say, oh, well, you must not like me very much. I don't feel very accepted here. This is not great. So lesson number 1 to take away, explain why rather than just saying no. Saying no might be factually correct, that's true, but humans are more than yes or no, right? You need to be able to give more context to make people understand. So let's try this again. A comment could say, Ruby doesn't have a plus plus operator, so this code will raise a syntax error. That's a little better. That explains what the problem is, but still doesn't tell people how to fix the problem. Also, what's a syntax error? Maybe you're not familiar with this language. Why is this bad? Please explain more. Also, link to some documentation, please. Someone told me Ruby does have a plus plus operator, so I don't know if I should believe you just because you're saying this, or the person that told me, who was more senior, I don't know. It's hard to tell. So rule number 2, propose solutions. If you can, if there's anything you can do to try and help the person work towards a better solution, propose that. because that goes so much farther than just saying, no, that's not going to work, and here's why. Here's another example. This is the last example. Ruby doesn't have a plus plus operator, and that sentence there is linked to some documentation that'll help the person understand why it doesn't or that it doesn't. This goes on to say this code will raise a syntax error and the app will fail to start. That's pretty clear. Right? That explains exactly what's going to happen and why it's bad. But then this goes on to say you can use the plus equals operator instead, like this, and actually has a code snippet, which is super useful. That means the person who wrote this code can just take that snippet, drop it in their code, and things work again. Whoever wrote this comment probably cares about having the person's work completed, right? This person's not working against the person who made the original code change. Let's compare the two comments. The one on the left, super terse, technically correct, but easy to interpret negatively. The one on the right, a little bit more explanation, educational, and helps a lot. So big green check mark on that one. That comment on the right makes people feel safe and accepted at work, which is super, super important. This makes juniors feel accepted at work, makes interns feel accepted, even makes more senior people who might not be familiar with the code feel happy working with their coworkers, and you need that. Of course, this is a very contrived example. Not all feedback is right or wrong. Most feedback is about a gray area in the middle. There's design decisions you might make. There are different ways of doing things. You can still apply these two principles. Explain why rather than just saying no, and propose solutions. So even with these two principles, there are still many easy ways to do it wrong. And yes, of course, that GIF needs to stay up there for a second. But yes, it's very easy to do it wrong, even if you keep these things in mind. And let me talk about a way that I do it wrong all the time. I leave comments like this sometimes on pull requests. So people put up their code, and I say, oh, why didn't you use this function? In this case, I'm saying, why didn't you use the register defaults function? And let me just zoom in on the part that I really don't like here. Just keep zooming. Why didn't you? Why didn't you use this? Again, I'm going to go to my coworker here and ask, or say what he said instead, because he says this much better than I could. Corey Champlin again says, why didn't you assume that the author of the code considered your suggestion and explicitly chose a different one, which may not be the case? It implies that your alternative is obviously superior and that you require the author justify their solution against it. It implies that what may be intended as a mere suggestion is in fact the default. So if you say, why didn't you to someone, that kind of comes across as well, obviously there's this solution that everybody knows and you just don't know it, so you must not know it. You must be stupid or something. It's easy to interpret it that way, which is really, really hard on people who are not totally sure with their skills or brand new to this, right? It's not great for beginners. So my coworker Zaina actually had a comment right after I did. We chased each other for the comment there. And she said, does the use of register defaults help here? Which is great because this has the exact same content of the message as my message did, but this is much, much nicer for anybody reading it. This doesn't assume that there's an obvious answer that everybody knows and you just forgot about it or didn't use it. Zaina here is saying, you could try to use this maybe, and here's a link to it so you can learn about something and try to make the code better. Comments like this make people feel safe and accepted at work. And again, we need more of that. So enough of GitHub. I'm going to talk about Slack for a second. Slack or HipChat or whatever your team collaboration tool is, your chat tool is. Here's something that actually happened in a work Slack channel recently. Someone dropped in and said, hi team, I tried out your new feature that you just launched. Yay, okay, that's great. But I can't seem to get it to work. Am I doing something wrong here? Okay. So I replied saying, you know what? It's working fine for me. Yeah, you must be doing something wrong. Mic drop, walk away. Again, that's not great, right? That's a terribly negative statement to say. I don't know this person. They've never met me. They work in a different office for me as well. And without emotional context, without being able to see my face or make eye contact, see my body language, this sounds like an incredibly flippant thing to say. I might not have meant this negatively, but it comes across negative for sure. I could have said this instead. It should be working, let me try. But this is not really better at all. In fact, this is almost worse. Just saying it should be working like that can be read as, oh, the software is infallible. We built something perfect. So obviously if it's not working, that's your fault. And then let me try. I read that as kind of well, get away, let me do this. I can work, I can do this. Just hand it over to me. This is a little better. I could say, hey, the messaging around that feature is still a bit confusing, sorry. Admit that it's not necessarily the person who's trying to use the feature that's at fault here. I can go on to say, let me take a look and see if I can find the issue, and I'll file a bug to clarify the error message too. there's almost no way to misinterpret this as a negative or angry or otherwise negative statement, right? Anybody reading this realizes that I actually do want to help, and it's hard to walk away from this feeling unhappy. Comments like this make people feel safe and accepted at work, and we do need more of that. So, I guess the message from all of this is be kind, but that sounds way too obvious, because I want to assume that everyone in this audience is trying to be kind on a daily basis and is trying to be a nice person. So what I really mean is, online, you need to be even more kind than you would be in real life. And again, this is because there's a lack of emotional context. If you can't see someone's face, if you can't see their body language or hear their tone of voice, you assume the worst, because humans just do that. People can't see your face over the internet. You're just all faceless blobs or profile photos, and you don't know everybody you're talking to. So when I gave this talk the first time to some coworkers, someone brought up a very good point. Someone asked, well, why should I care if others are sensitive? What does it matter to me? What if I say something and someone else misinterprets it? How is that my fault? And I kind of stepped back there for a second and I was like, no, that's wrong. You should care, of course you should care. Being understood is your problem. Communication is about talking with someone, right? A conversation happens between two people. It's not one person yelling at another person. Otherwise you're just yelling into the void. If you try to say something to someone and they interpret that differently, you still need to do some work to make sure you're understood correctly. So being understood is your problem. You do need to care about this. This is important. All right, I think I'm actually racing through this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something called the robustness principle, which is a principle for designing software. This is something that I hope will be an analogy in a slide or two. But the robustness principle is something that you can use when designing software that accepts input and outputs output as well. So it says, be conservative in what you do, but be liberal in what you accept from others. So a good example of this is a web browser. A web browser takes an HTML from somewhere else, and the HTML might be correctly formatted, might be not correctly formatted. A browser just takes all of that and deals with it no matter what, tries to render it as best as it can. However, if you were to try and save a page from a web browser, it would probably try to save the most correct HTML possible, because it wouldn't assume that other clients could accept incorrectly formatted HTML. So that's a computing example, but we can apply this to speaking with others as well, or communicating online. The exact same principle applies if we're talking about positivity in communications. Be extra positive in what you write online, but also assume positive intent when reading what others write. So this is saying, when you are trying to communicate with someone else, don't assume that they're going to take everything positively. So be extra positive to compensate for that negative bias that exists in written communication. But no one else, or you can't assume that other people will do this too. So you should assume that others are generally being positive unless they're explicitly being negative. That kind of helps you correct for the negative bias in written communications, no matter what. And the more people that do this, the better everything gets. So I'm a little bit early, which is great. The takeaway here, be even more kind than you would be in real life. Online is hard, words are hard, but doing this can probably help and make communication and collaboration with people at work or in school or whatever much easier. So because I'm a little early, there's time for questions. That's great. Thanks so much for having me, CUSEC. Sorry. Got a mic there and a mic there.
Yeah, there's a mic on either side if people want to ask questions.
Or no questions are okay too, that's fine. Find me on Twitter if you'd like. Oh, question over there. Oh, can you come and use the mic, please?
All right, so that was a great presentation, and I liked your message, and I agree with that. But my question is, for each subsequent step of making it nicer and more friendly, the messages were getting longer and longer, which is fine. But do you have any tips for how to be concise and kind without, being too verbose?
That's a great question, actually. There is a balance there, right? What I find is I write as much as I need to fulfill all those points. Like I explain what's wrong. I generally try to offer a solution, or at least a link to a solution or something like that. And if I find myself, it doesn't really help to say this, but like there's usually a point where I'm like, have I written enough yet? And I look at what I've written and I reread the entire thing, and sometimes it is a little too much, but it's better to err on the side of writing a little too much and having the person understand your meaning and not misinterpret the statement than writing too little and leave room open for misinterpretation.
Cool, thanks.
No worries.
Hello. Hello. So what is your advice on emoji use?
Ah, yes, emoji.
I overuse emojis.
Okay, good. Yeah, actually, I cut a couple slides of an emoji because I was going overtime in my dry run. But emoji are complicated because people have different ideas of what emoji mean sometimes. And on different platforms, emoji have different emotional sentiments. There was actually a paper recently saying that if you were an Android user and you received emoji from iPhone users, your emoji, like they could send something that was intended to be positive and you would read it as negative because of the difference in character sets. I would say use emoji sparingly. Words are still more verbose. Like if you type more words, then people will probably understand your meaning better than if you stuck one emoji in there. But if you need to be concise, if there's not much room for you to write words, then throw an emoji in there just to like almost diffuse the situation. If the only answer to someone's question is no, throw in a no and a happy face, right? It's hard to misinterpret that. No.
Okay, thank you.
So I had a question about the promptness in responses. So I know that as interns, sometimes we only get short responses back from like people senior to us because they're busier. And sometimes those responses don't come in time or they take forever to come. So do you think as interns or even as like senior people, we should focus on promptness as another way to like improve written communication, or what's your take on that?
That's a really good question. So promptness is hard because a lot of these tools allow for total asynchrony. Like you can do all of your work at one time and have responses come in later from someone in a different time zone or in a different office or something like that. So I don't try to read too much into promptness. If possible, like having an immediate response usually means that you could have an immediate conversation instead. Like if someone's responding to GitHub pull request comments, for example, and you notice they're responding right after you do, hop into Slack or actually find them in person if possible and just have a face-to-face conversation, which would be even faster. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't rely on promptness to mean very much.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask where you got that T-shirt and if there comes in other fonts as well?
I'm so glad I got that response. I got this T-shirt from someone, actually, yeah, this was like one guy makes all these T-shirts. So I'll try to post the link along with my slides somewhere. But yeah, I saw him wearing it somewhere and I actually walked up to him and I was just like, can I buy your shirt? I really want that. But he had more, so I just, yeah.
Does he have other fonts as well?
No, just Helvetica in Comic Sans, sorry. Oh, question over here?
Kind of a comment that I have about this. You compare how text comes across differently than when you're talking in person with someone. But also one thing that I feel is there's also a difference when talking to someone face to face and on the phone, for example.
Yes, that's true.
So I remember I had a phone interview and I thought that was very difficult to get my point across. Do you have any thoughts on how to do well on phone instead?
That's tough, actually. The phone gives you one more data point in that you can hear the intonation of the other person's voice, and that gives you a lot more. But actually, if I go back a bunch of slides, part of the study, I showed a study a little while back, and they also talked about voice communication. And what they found was that voice communication was close to what they expected. I think there it says 73% of people who left a voice message actually did understand the emotional sentiment there. So it's closer, but still not perfect. What I try to do is be a little bit more emotive with my voice when I'm in a phone interview or something like that, because it's very hard to gauge anything with voice. But it's so much easier than text. You don't need to be overly verbose. You can just throw a little bit more into your intonation and things like that, I suppose. I haven't thought too much about it though, but that's a great comment.
Thank you.
All right, one more.
One thing I noticed, first of all, thank you very much for the talk. You actually had a slide about someone asking about the software you had. I don't know if you want to go back there really quick.
Someone have software, here it is.
On Slack, yeah.
Yes.
So one thing I noticed is that the response was something to look at, but also the question. Do you have any maybe tips, obviously not a whole presentation like you just did, but how about asking questions like that?
Yeah, actually. So this is a very well asked question here. This is essentially a bug report coming from someone who is having trouble using software. The bug report comes in the form of an image. So this person took a screenshot and then I think used an app called Sketch or something like that to add arrows pointing to what was wrong and what was difficult to use. And then, a nice little message saying, hey, I know that you guys did this. Can you help with this? A little bit more detail would be nice, I suppose. Actually, I did edit this to remove some work-specific details, but something like that, even just having an image and having arrows and things like that, that's super, super helpful. And I think the app, let me actually just double check because that's important, Skitch. It's called Skitch, S-K-I-T-C-H.
Cool. All right, thank you.
No problem. Hurry up.
That's all the time we have for questions. The next talk will be starting in a few minutes. Thank you.